Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. And to this Orion lecture series in fine arts with Philippe Pasquier from Simon Fraser University. My name is Kirk McNally. I'm the Associate Dean, Creative Activity Research and Administration for the Faculty of Fine Arts. And I think, it's been mentioned a couple times coming in, it's just such a fantastic spot to be coming. It's really vibrant, it's really alive, all of our students walking past them. So I'm very happy and thankful to the Digital Scholarship Commons for hosting us here today. I do want to just recognize and acknowledge the decolonizing work that's being done downstairs, and I think that sort of feeds into this atmosphere that's now in the libraries. On your way in, you would have seen a lot of artwork in the student space, and perhaps walking through the front doors, you saw the design on those front doors. It was a halibut, and that is by the artist Jean Hayupus. The halibut traditionally represents transformation states, and of course, coming into the library, it's transformation of knowledge. So I think that's a nice place to start. And feeding into my sort of metaphor here, we're on the west side of campus, so we can kind of like with those halibut swimming across campus and landing here in the library, and we're very happy to be here. I do want to then, thinking about the place where we are and the land on which we are gathered, please join me in acknowledging and respecting the Kwanghan, the Songhees, Kiksepsum peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Kwanghan and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Thank you to Christine Wald, who's been instrumental in putting this together, and of course, again, the Digital Scholarship Commons for hosting us. So without further ado, I think it's no surprise that AI is on the tip of many, many, many people's tongues, and I'm just so thrilled to have Philippe here today, who has a unique perspective on this technology and has a long history and excellence of working with the technology, both as a scientist, an artist, educator, and community builder. If you don't know Philippe, Philippe is a professor in the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University, director of the Metacreation Lab for Creative AI. Philippe's expertise lies in the theory and practice of artificial intelligence, specifically in endowing machines with autonomous behaviors, with a focus on creative and artistic applications. Through the Metacreation Lab, he leads a multidisciplinary research creation program that bridges fundamental research in generative AI, machine learning, effective computing, and computer-assisted creativity with artistic practice in interactive and generative art. He and his team have developed generative and interactive systems that engage with domains as broad as music composition, sound design, 3D character animation, choreography, video game level generation, and audio-visual installations. This artistic work has been presented at prominent venues across the world. And it's just, so some examples, MUTEK was mentioned, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about this as we go through the presentation. Philippe's AI algorithms have reached millions through collaborations with companies such as Steinberg, Ableton, Teenage Engineering, Elias, and Microsoft. So now, please join me in welcoming Philippe, and we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Kirk, and thanks to everyone helping to organize. Thanks to the Faculty of Fine Art. I'm really happy to be here in Victoria. I come from SFU Vancouver, on the other side of the water, from another unceded territory from the Coast Salish people. So today is my opportunity to introduce myself and the work we do. And I'm going to take examples of the work we do in the lab, but it's also going to be an opportunity for me to put forward a little bit of a narrative and a number of ideas and reflections around AI and the rise of AI, all the hopes that it generates, but also all the fears that it certainly, and angst that it certainly also generates. And when I'm going to talk about AI today, I'm not going to talk about machine taking over with consciousness and intelligence as we know it. We don't really understand human intelligence. We're well pressed to make machine that would do that. But what I'm going to talk about is a situation that is already the case, in which we have machine that automates tasks for which normally it takes a human brain. And if you think about AI, it's just this moving front of automating increasingly complex tasks. Before Excel and the modern calculator and computer, only our brain could make a six-figure operation. Now, do we consider that the fact that Excel can make multiplication really fast is amazing? Not anymore. And so this front of automation that comes with the computerization of society is just moving forward. And nowadays we already have in all sorts of parts of our society, we rely on AI algorithms that automate tasks. My specialty is when we start to automate creative tasks, whether completely automate them or often we don't want to replace no artists, we augment or we make algorithms that automate the tasks partially. And what we mean by creative tasks and automating them is simply the definition of a creative task as something that doesn't have an optimal solution. So if you search for the shortest path on a Google map between A and B, there is such a thing as the shortest path and the best road to take right now given the traffic and all sort of things. When you make poetry, when you draw, when you make music, and people in this room are well aware of that, then there is no such thing as a subjective best outcome. There's an objective best outcome. There's definitely a strong subjective dimension. And from a computer science perspective, that makes those tasks quite a bit more challenging, but also quite a bit more interesting, because there's something inherently, at least a priori, human into creative tasks. So I'm going to talk about creative tasks, and I'm not going to talk so much about creativity. Creativity in philosophy is an essentially contested concept. Philosophers have been debating about it for 2,000 years. I predict they will for another 2,000 years. Meanwhile, we're making machines that do stuff. And we do that as a computer scientist. We do new algorithms and we deploy them. When they work, we collaborate with the industry to try to deploy them and to evaluate them. And in terms of evaluating them, we work with artists and we also work ourselves as artists with those algorithms. So this is the idea of participatory design, that if we want to develop tools for artists, then we better involve artists from the get-go. And that's even true for the algorithmic side and the mathematics underlying those systems, as well as the interface design. So today what I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes or so, and we'll have time for Q&As after, but if you feel like interrupting and asking a question, feel free to raise your hand. In the next 40 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about what I think are going to be and already are the two main families of application of AI to creative tasks and creative domain. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluation studies we've been conducting in the lab and elsewhere. And then I'm going to wrap up with challenges and opportunities. So the first family and type of system I want to talk about is some of the most challenging one, are systems that generate new content in real time. This is this idea of embedded generation, which is now reified into the concept of agents. ChatGPT is an agent, and in my lab we've been working for the last 15 years on musical agents. And this notion of agents is the main paradigm, and when we teach in computer science or elsewhere AI, we typically introduce this notion of agents as one of the main concepts. And the notion of agents is not very complicated. What do we mean by an artificial agent? We simply mean it's a software that can perceive the world it's in and can act on that particular world. In our case, we make agents that are on stage with musicians. They listen to the music made by those musicians, and they play along with them. And so if you want to know more about this notion of musical agents, it's a very small niche, people using AI that plays music on stage, but in fact, in academia, often small niches still have a lot to say. And there's a state of the art we issued, and believe it or not, there's 80 different architecture and 80 different types of musical agent systems that have been developed for the last 45 years, so it's not even new, by all sorts of artists, computer scientists, and designers. So if you want to know more about musical agents, there's a lot, and I'm not going to introduce all of it here and now. I'm just going to say that our agent architecture is called MASOM, and it's been around for a number of years. We used it, and musicians are using it. What is this agent doing? It's basically trained by listening, so it's an experimental music agent. It's trained by listening to CDs, like any musician would. If you're born on an island and you never hear music, you're not going to start by composing a symphony. Music is really a social construction, and so those agents, they listen to existing music, and they learn what type of sounds are being used, and they remember if I was this composer, what type of sound would I play after this sound and this sound and this sound? So they have a temporal model, as we call it, of the music being played. And when we play with those agents, we ask them to imitate a dead composer often. That's what we do in our artistic practice. And we play along with them. And then they reason. And they're like, okay, Philippe just played that. I just played this. What would that composer that I tried to imitate would play next? And then they're going to go ahead and play next. They can play alone, those musical agents, like a musician can, or they can play in groups. I'm going to play an excerpt of the agent playing alone at Ars Electronica in 2017. So that's the agent playing alone. It could be a canned soundtrack. But what's interesting is this agent is interacting with the system making the visuals, and you can see that the interaction between the visuals and the sound are really, really tight. In fact, if you're in that room at that moment, the interaction between the two is something that you can't make if you're human. Only two artificial agents communicate fast enough to make it perceptually work that way. But the real interest of those agents is not when they are on their own, is when they interact. And so we played on stage here at the Society for Art and Technology in their dome, which is a room with 95 speakers and 8 projectors. People are lying on the floor. If you have not been and you end up going to Montreal, I really recommend it. Lots of really great programming in this room and lots of fun. And in this case, we do improvise with those agents on stage, which is sort of a risk-taking. And so the concept that I introduced here that is in the title for today is that of co-creation. In this case, the musical agent, they act as creative partner in real time. If the agent does something I don't like, oops, too late, I'm on stage in front of the audience. I have to work with it, like a regular human musician would. And so we play with them. I'm going to not play more examples for the sake of time here. So we've been having this thread of work on this type of musical agents. We won some awards for it. And then we started to add functionalities. Right now we can give feedback to the agent when we rehearse or when a musician rehearses with the agent and tell, hey, I want to do a little bit more of that and less of that, and personalize the work of the agent. So this piece, when we play with those agents, is called Revived. And it's a little bit controversial because it's dealing with this idea of afterlife of dead musicians. I always wanted to play with David Tudor. He's dead. So we train agents on him and we get to improvise with him on stage. That was just my first example of co-creative system that do things in real time as you play with them. We've also been working in the area of movement generation quite early on and generating avatars movement that we can control in real time. So we can also do that by playing motion captures of actors, but if you run video games like World of Warcraft, and you have 11 million players playing on average 20 hours per week, then how many movements do you need? How many stories do you need? How many assets for the environment do you need? How many minutes of music do you need? Way too many is the answer. And so there's a turn towards generative system in those cases for which we move from linear to non-linear media, and then the number of assets we need grows exponentially and very quickly. We were also some of the first ones doing some pretty funny stuff with multimodal generation. That is when we make an agent dance on music, like here. Here, dancing on generative music, actually. And so the question that I often get by artists and artistic community is why? We don't really need those agents. And I just gave you one answer, one element of answer is this move from linear to interactive media. If you work on a book, a movie, a CD, this movie maybe an hour and a half, you can have like Pixar 200 people looking at every second of the images and the music. If you generate an open world and you have millions of people in that open world, then you can't do that anymore. You can't can all of the content. It's just not human, the amount of things you have to create. So there's a real economical pull by the industry to develop those generative systems. But I don't think that's interesting. What I think is more interesting is this potential and this promise that AI is giving us of adaptive experiences. This idea that eventually we have systems that are progressively, and you will see that in the next 10 to 15 years a lot, that are capable of tracking the flow zone of their user and to generate the right content at the right moment for a particular user. If you take the examples of interactive systems, because this move from linear to interaction is real, let's take a video game, or a lesson, or even a conversation. If this video game or this experience is too easy, it's made for kids, it's going to be boring, I'm going to lose your attention, you're not going to keep on playing. If it's too hard, it's discouraging, you're not moving forward, you keep on losing. I'm a slow learner when it comes to game. You're going to be discouraged, you're going to stop. There is this, and that's a very general result from psychology, this flow zone that keeps musicians, creatives, learners, interactors in general engaged into an experience or not. It turns out that with AI, and we cannot track whether the user is in the flow zone or not. And we can therefore adapt the experience of that user to its flow zone. Some people learn very, very slowly. Some people learn very fast. Some people learn very fast and then they plateau for a while. How would you know? How can you have prepared the right content for the right person? The only reason why I teach 170 students at a time is economical. If you're a king or a sultan, which there still are some, actually, you have a team of professors for you. You have individual education. And so you're going to see a lot of, in education, in gaming, and also in entertainment, a lot of systems that are not going to just recommend you what to consume, but are going to generate the right content at the right time for the right person. Lots of excitement, lots of investment, likely way too much, around the promise of those AI-driven adaptive experience. And this is not just blah blah. This is things we were doing already 10 years ago almost for video games, where we were capable of winning video game level generation competition against human designers by tracking the flow of the player and generated what's coming next in the game based on what the player is doing at a given moment. And we did run empirical experiment, showing that yes, if an artificial agent is looking at you playing the game and deciding how happy, sad the situation is, if you're winning or losing, then it can generate the content and the music that match best so as to improve your the emotion that you feel, their intensity, improve the level of immersion and enjoyment. And this is not going to just be for music generation or for games. This is now bleeding towards, that's my second prediction, what you're going to see a lot of, towards what we call functional generation. Now that we have systems that generate at human competitive level some content and creative assets, we can go one step further, which is to generate for a given goal a certain content. So here, for example, we have alumni at SFU that have started a startup, and there's a second one that exists because this one folded, where you decide upon a goal. Maybe you want to sleep, maybe you want to relax, maybe you want to work and stay focused. You are equipped with a smartwatch who is indicating to the system what state you're in, and the system will learn progressively what type of content to deliver to you so as to keep you in that state. So what I'm describing here is the potential of a world in which we move, and I'm not saying I'm for it, but this is what's going to happen. We move from content recommendation. Google recommends you what website to go to check, right? Spotify recommends you what music to listen to next. Netflix recommends you what film to watch next, etc., etc. Here I'm talking about generating the content. And you see that Google start doing it now because it's not actually just telling you which site is recommended. It's actually also summarizing and giving you the answer, giving you directly the content at the top, something they're being sued for at the moment. So that would be some of the reason why. The first family I talked about was those co-creative systems. They create with you. They're not usually very interesting to artists, and they're usually not very good. What's much more powerful and already happening quite a lot is computer-assisted creativity, where the artist is, of course, in the driver's seat and get to make creative decision. And that has been dumped down to prompting. So this massive rise since 2021, 2022 of prompt-based art generation. You find it in visuals. I'm sure everyone here has used DALL-E or Midjourney. You find it for text. When you ChatGPT generates you a textual answer. You can do it for music and for video and for pretty much any medium that you could manipulate through a computer way. We were pretty early in developing this type of systems, and in fact, this idea of prompting is not really new. In 2012, we were already releasing some systems for computer-assisted sound design using prompting. Here it's called Audio Metaphor, and it's still online. You can try it for yourself. You describe a scene. Maybe I want to hear kids playing in the park. You describe the emotion of that scene. Maybe it starts, it's happy, and it finishes, it's scary. And then it's going to retrieve sounds and give you, here each little box is a wave sound, and give you a full timeline, a full Pro Tools or Reaper or Ableton mix. And then you can go back and forth with the system. That's the idea of computer-assisted creativity. You make a request, you're sort of the curator, you're the commissioner. You ask for something, it makes it, and then you go back and forth until you're happy, or you can always upload that in Reaper and start doing manual work on it or with it. So for example, if I had asked for a waterfall in Thailand, it might make something that sounds like this. Etc. And this computer-assisted creativity workflow, of course, if you give those systems to artists or to humans, because humans are creative, they're going to start twisting and find new use and explore with using those tools. For example, we could ask for something a bit more abstract. A quenching rain drench my burning head, and then it might sound like this. So that's where we were at 13 years ago. You can try it for yourself. I'll talk about an evaluation we did with a novice sound designer and that system. And then deep learning happened, because 10 years ago we didn't have those massive neural network trains on everyone's data, and now we do. And so you probably saw Udio and Suno. Suno just folded. I was an expert witness on the federal court of the US for that legal case of copyright infringement by those companies who have trained really big music models on all of the music available online, and the stakeholder that are the artists sometimes, but often the people who make the money out of the music are not happy. Indeed, if you ask an happy, catchy hip-hop song about myself presenting creative AI at the University of Victoria with a female voice, you'll get something like this.
Yeah. Philippe Pasquier's in the place, you know it's time to shine. Creative AI and fine arts, yeah, we're crossing that line. Got the crowd all hot, minds lit like a spark. The University of Victoria, we're raising the bar. This tech is no illusion, we're merging with art,
etc. And if I don't like it, I want a folk one, well, no problem.
In the quiet halls of learning she stood, the Russian heart her spirit understood. Philippe taught of visions born from code, a canvas where imagination flowed.
And just to be clear, here I can download the stems, I can upload the stems as well. I can play the guitar and the system does the rest. I can edit the lyrics. I can change the voice for mine. I can change the language. I tried it when I was giving talks in Indonesia. There's no problem doing hip-hop in Indonesian. And then if you think, well, I do experimental music, I'm a composer, I do electroacoustic music, surely that these systems can't do that, then you would be wrong. So, of course, people are afraid, people aren't happy, and surely some disruption is really happening with that. And as I said, I get to sit on some of those as expert witness. There is also going with those legal shenanigans, the rise of AI slop. Second concept I introduced, you probably heard about it already from the news, this idea that there's now an invasion of digital content generated by AI that is not necessarily easy to tell apart from human-made content, and the prediction is within the internet, the whole of it, within 5 years, human-made content will be 10% or under of the content we get to consume online. There's people abusing those systems and taking some of the money away from the actual human artists that already didn't have any because streaming took all of the money away in the first place. And there's all sorts of things happening. There's also discussions around this idea of prompting and the text box as an interface. Like, in fact, legally, in most countries, prompting would not give you authorship of what comes out. And that's really the question, is this prompting enough to be considered a creator? Is it you creating something, or are you just driving that fantastic creative machine made by hundreds of engineers, trained on those massive data centers and that are possible to generate that? I don't think prompting with text is a really good interface, and I would hate to have to spend the rest of my life talking to my computer, personally. But there are alternatives to prompting, and what I want to say in the rest of this conversation here is to show you that there's a diversity of AI, and this particular flavor of AI, which is sold to us by for-profit Californian enterprise for the most part, is not all there is. So I'm going to take the example of some work we do in computer-assisted composition to show you how we can do better than prompting maybe. Here again, I'm going to talk about our system in the lab. Turns out there's about 130 other systems using AI for composition that exist out there at the moment. Some of them, they generate audio, that you can hear, like the one we just listened to, and the sound design system, audio metaphor that I was presenting before. But here I'm going to focus on systems that generate scores, that generate MIDI notation for music. Here again, this is nothing new. We've been working on those systems for 15 years. But in the last few years, deep learning happened, and we were capable indeed to train some of the best composition assistant systems that we can think of, trained on very large data sets, because as a researcher in Canada, in universities, everyone does, we are protected by fair dealing, and I can actually scrap the entire internet. And then I can train a model, and then I can take that model and sell it to Steinberg, because that model doesn't have the data, and that model doesn't replicate the data. And I can show formally that it doesn't do plagiarism. And that's a loophole that every company has been using generously, and that's why Google, Facebook, and Alphabet, and all of those companies are collaborating with labs in the US, here in Canada, or all over the world to get access to the scrap data under fair use by academics. This data set is released actually, but you can only download it if you're a researcher, or at least if you tell me you are going to use it for research. But of course, who knows, right? And so we train those models, and they're really, really good. And here we don't prompt them with text, we prompt them with music, meaning that if you need to have composed some music to be able to ask a question to the system. And the system takes your music, or some music you selected, as a prompt in a way, and will complement that music according to your request. And that's a phenomenon and a type of request that we call in-painting. I'll play you a video so that it's more clear. doesn't, of course, it doesn't sound as good as Suno because it's not generating the audio, it's just generating the score, and a very dumb synthesizer was playing the score here. But just, yeah, you can start with your own music, and that's really what we recommend, but as you saw in the examples, you can also start with someone else's music, and then you can create new track. You can use it as a what-if machine. What if I had one violin and a marimba here? You can also regenerate a track. Okay, let's redo the bass line. Or you can say, well, I like that, but I don't like this bar and this bar. Let's redo it again. And you can do that over entire pieces. And then we give control, actual musical control, both low-level control. What is the number of voice of polyphony you want for this track? Maybe you have a synthesizer, it has 3 voices or 3 oscillators, and then there's no point generating more voices of polyphony. You want note duration, key mode, etc., but also high-level controls. The musical style. In fact, we could even imitate a composer, but be careful. And high-level attributes like you find them in Spotify, danceability, valence and arousal, tension, which is so important for film music or video game music, controlling in real time how the music is going to be perceived. This is going to be perceived as happy or sad, tense or calm, etc., etc. I could play more examples, but the system works really, really well. And the way I know that is because also then plenty of industries start calling me, wanting to put their hand on the system. Elias, for example, is a company that makes software for composers for video games. In video games, there's a lot of making themes and loops and variations, the happy one, the sad one, the one for the moment where there's a combat, the one for when you lose, the one for when you win. And eventually you end up with many, many parts. And then because in the game those parts are going to be adaptively selected depending on what the player is doing, then you need transitions. And maybe if you have written 20 different parts, then you need 400 different transitions between all those parts. And that's when the AI can help assist the composer in doing work that otherwise is really tedious and takes time. We also work with synthesizer company, with the teenage engineering. We were generating presets for them earlier, and now we make systems that generate patterns that help people who buy the synthesizer. They want to be a musician, but they never finished a track. They love playing with the sounds, but they don't really know how to go about composing a tune, and so we can help them. We make music with the systems ourselves, and I won't bore you with that. And we started working with companies and releasing some of the systems. It was very clear early on to us that there was 3 types of companies, like the Google of this world, who can afford paying $4 billion every year to the European community for not following the law because they make $22 billion in Europe. Then you get the startup company like Suno or Udio who have nothing to lose because they have one product and it's AI, so they end up in court. And people like Ableton were like, Philippe, this is great, we would love to release it, there's no way we're going to release it until the legal shenanigan is clean, of course. We have 6 million license, you know, the reputational damage, being in court, we have hundreds of features, that one AI feature, we're not going to let it kill us. Therefore, they're much, much more conservative. And in fact, all of the systems I'm going to talk to you about that we worked with companies in our lab, none of them has been actually completely released, or at least not under the name of the company. And we use them mostly for evaluation purposes and for anticipating what type of features we really want to push. But if you want to try our model, you can still do it online. We have an online system developed by a PhD student called Calliope that allows you to do it. Let's see here how we could remix and make some original Mozart music, that sounds bizarre to say, for, let's say, an animation for kids. So this is original Mozart. This sounds a little bit like it, but Mozart is not involved anymore. And then I'm going to add some parts that Mozart didn't even have available at the time. And here again, this is not played by musicians, this is just the MIDI being rendered so that we have an idea of that score. And then we push new features that are really scary and powerful, because now, if I'm a musician and BBC calls on Monday and tells me, okay, we need a pastiche of this track because we're not going to pay copyright for those 60 countries, a lot of studios get asked to do those type of things. Then now I can enter that composition and ask to the system, hey, change all of the bar one by one and do that 1,000 times. And now rank all of the variation of that original composition by how close or how far they are to the original. And just as a musician, I will listen to it and I will be, this one is good and it's far enough. Yeah, I'm done. So there is a potential disruption coming with the systems and some features that are really brutal. If you want to try, we have those features there. At the same time, music making is very, very rich and complex process with dozens and dozens of tasks, from the composition to the interpretation, the mixing, the mastering. And in fact, there's every year an AI song contest run by some friends in the Netherlands, and there's always like 50 to 100 bands entering the contest, and you will be amazed how none of those bands use AI in the same way or for the same thing. Some of them are a tiny bit of AI and you will be hard-pressed to tell. Some of them are all AI and it's fun too. So there's really a practice and an appropriation by artists of those tools, as you would expect. But because it becomes clear that those tools are going to start augmenting every creative software, we wanted to work on evaluations. So I showed you composition, but we also do AI for sound synthesis, and it works as well. And what I'm getting with that is this paradigm of computer-assisted creativity, of going back and forth with a generative system, is not a new way to produce content. And it's going to very quickly supplant, at least for beginners, the old ways. And you can think of any creative task, and I challenge you, if you find a creative task for which I don't know an AI system, and it's a task that can be computer mediated, if you tell me dance like that, yeah, we don't know how to do that. Although people in robotics tried, they're not having a lot of luck. But if you think of any creative task, whether it's fashion, cocktail making, etc., there's already AI for it. So the thing is quite systematic, quite brutal, like the computerization of society, not democratic. We didn't vote to use a computer 8 hours a day every day. You didn't vote for those AI systems to be put everywhere. This is the ecosystem. You think about a task, you think about a modality. There is an AI that is human competitive at that task at the moment. At least it's a good assumption. So it's very important, if we deploy that at scale, which we do, to evaluate the systems and see what it changes. And we do that in two ways. First, because we believe in the informal, the real world. Is it the case that those systems are helping creatives do anything? Does it work? It turns out right now, and that may just be hopefully a trend, right now AI artists, which are 100% machine generated, it's not like they're using AI for mastering only, are in the Bill charts, and they're ranking pretty high. And then we work ourselves in the lab with artists. We got some funding from the Canada Council for the Arts to do so. Some albums are being released, and we have an artistic residency. We had the second edition this year, where the French consulate pay for a French composer or sound artist to come and directly play and tinker with our algorithm, with our tools in the lab, and give us some feedback that way. Because eventually we work in academia, of course, and so what we're more interested in the informal evidence that stuff is happening is more formal scientific evaluation. And there's two sides we're really interested in evaluating. One side is the side of the creators. Because if you tell those creators, now you're going to use that AI system every day, forget about the previous way to do things, then what does it feel? We're really interested in those type of changes. And we did an experiment with beginners first. So there's two promises with Gen AI. It's going to lower the barrier of entry for beginners, and it's going to be great for education. Is it the case? Well, I teach sound design, and this is the first and only sound design course that my students have. And when we do an experiment, it's true that we find that they're a little bit faster, they're 20% faster when they use our audio metaphor system into their sound design project. And when we grade them, they get a better grade when they use the system than when they don't, interestingly. However, we also notice that they are really novice, and they show that the worse they are, the better the system helps them. But what's really interesting, and and we did follow up on that, is this idea that this is one prompting-based systems, as I was describing, and this one has a text field in it. And as a result, half of the students didn't feel that they had no authorship into the output. And that's really something that I think is worth noticing. Yes, maybe people can create faster and better with AI, but if, as an artist, you don't feel it's your music at the end, then what's the point? So we've been working on a more refined experimental protocol in collaboration with Steinberg, because we have our AI system in Cubase. Cubase is one of the oldest digital audio workstation, and here we had about 20 professional composers, and the definition is very simple. Those are people who make their money using Cubase. This is a livelihood. And then we're not really interested whether this AI is good, because we think it's okay. Is it efficient? Does it make you gain time? Still interesting to the company, to the employer, to Steinberg, but not so much to us. What we're really after in those experiments is agency. Do you feel you can express yourself with or through that machine? And the phenomenology and the authorship of, is it your work that comes out and the machine helped? Is it a collaboration between the co-authoring between you and the machine? Or is it the machine's work and you've been guiding the machine to some great music, but it's not your music and you have nothing to do with it? You don't feel that it belongs. And then the phenomenology. If now, from now on, every morning when you come to work, you have to use that system, and you've been doing, some of those professionals have been using Cubase for 25 years, 30 years straight, and now you tell them, no, every morning you have to use this, how do you feel? Do you feel like vomiting? Do you feel good? Like, what's happening there? And so, long story short, this is a pretty convoluted experience using acceptability tools that are not often used very often. Long story short, to our surprise, to some extent, we found that the artists had no problem with the system. They liked the system. They said that if the system was available, they would use it. But the artists, the professional composers, they were not keeping any of the output of the system. They really use it as a what-if machine. And they want to be able to personalize the system, give some previous compositions, and be like, hey, let's put like this instrument like this instrument like that. Oh no, give me another idea. You know, oh, I can work with this. And then they're going to eventually compose because that's what they do. They really don't need that machine to do it. But maybe they can explore a number of directions that they would not have the time to explore otherwise with the machine. So they were not really troubled by it. And in fact, we found that unlike the beginners, because it was their music at the end and they wrote all of it and didn't use much of what the machine did, they maintained definitely authorship on it. All right, so that's the evaluation on the creator side. We're also interested in evaluating what it does to the audience that is listening to the music. And there, this is really nothing new. Back in like 15 years ago, we were already capable of showing that if you don't tell people that it's AI made, they have no idea, like in the most cases, especially for compositions like MIDI compositions, because the interpretation is really important. And so that's really the question of synthetic media and this idea of deep fake, the fact that we can't tell anymore. And I'll pass here shortly because the situation gets complicated very quickly, but what we find is a very nuanced approach regarding the bias for or against machine creativity. And it turns out that depending on the amount of computational literacy that one has, people, if you reveal to them, if you tell them this music is machine generated, then some people will stop liking it, and some other people will like it more. And that depends on what type of knowledge they have about AI, how much human work it takes to make an AI song, and all sorts of things like that. And more work is demanded there. But we can't really count on the audience to discern human-made content and machine-made content, so we'll have to find other solutions. So before I start the last part of this talk, I have 10 more, maybe 15 minutes to go. So these are the pros and the opportunities that I tried to identify here with you. We get those two families of systems, co-creative systems, embedded generative systems, that have the potential to generate the right content at the right time for the particular user. And that means potentially enhancing any interactive experience. And you can see in music playing, in gaming, in education, in what we call functional generation, so music for well-being, soundscape for stress management. We literally, these are the names of PhD theses nowadays. The only reason you don't have a music therapist is because we keep them for people who are really in terrible pain and with complex disease and all that. And in fact, you probably self-prescribe music, but in fact, we probably can do better. And again, the only reason you don't have a music therapist is economical for the most part. And so there's real potential in there. And then we get those AI-assisted new workflow of going back and forth with a generative system. And here the promise is to make professionals better and more efficient at what they do, and to lower the barrier of entry for beginners. And eventually, also, this Gen AI system, they're on the verge of providing a more high-level and maybe a better interface for all, because the computerization of society has been quite brutal. A normal computational creative workstation looks like that, and that's a lot of buttons, And on the West Coast, in Vancouver, the Hollywood of the North, with all those VR and video game companies, you get a lot of workers that are click workers, really. They're in a creative software, they're going to click, in a software, you remember, you can click your way through, and you can undo, so you can go back like that, linearly, like go back. Nobody is going back 6,000 clicks just to start a different direction on the project, like no one is doing that, right? So exploration 0, you move forward, and basically you end up in this click factory where, yes, we industrialize and automatize physical work. Guess what? Now we have armies of creatives in front of computers clicking their way through. So maybe AI is a way to help with that and do better. Okay, so now I want to come back to the main issue, which is this legal gap between the big data I can scrap from the internet and those companies who sell those models. So there is the legal pushback from the artists and their stakeholders, but it's not the case that there's no way out. There is diversity in AI the same way that there's diversity in everything else. And against big data and big model and this idea of training a model on everyone's data, there's all sorts of alternative approach. There's an approach to do big data in a more ethical way. Adobe is doing that by retributing all the artists that contribute images to their model, and each time the model is used, a little bit of money is going back to the artist. I don't think that's going to make those artists rich. I still think there's a net loss in that move, the same way there was a net loss when music streaming started. But we need other alternatives. And another alternative is to remember that before big data, there was plenty of systems, and there was no big data. And when we talk to artists, what we find really is that artists don't really want to use just using prompting on a big model trained on anyone else's data. What they want is to craft, develop, train, maybe iteratively, their own model with their own data. They don't have big data. Maybe they have, if you're a photographer, a couple thousand images. Chris, we work with here, has certainly many thousands. If you make video, each frame is an image, so small data can be hundreds of thousands, but it can also be 50 images. They don't want to upload anything in the cloud. Data sovereignty is important. We work with indigenous artists and others who don't trust no one's cloud with their life work. They don't want to run Python or PyTorch. Painters, sculptors, people who want to use AI don't necessarily want to become computer scientists while doing so. They eventually want systems that allow them to manipulate all the parameters through direct manipulation and be able in real time to see what's happening so that they can really have a sense of the model. And then hopefully they want those software to be free and open source so that someone who knows the code could examine the code to make sure that it does what it says and nothing else. And so we search for those software, and guess what? And if you know one, you let me know. There's none. So because the for-profit company from California, they want your data. They have no. When's the last time you downloaded the software that you installed on your computer? Well, nobody does that anymore, anyway. And so there's none. Now there's things like Comfy, and people who are savvy can do things locally, but it always takes some code or some complexification. So we started with Autolium, and we're like, no. With Autolium, it's all graphics. You can load your own images, manage your data set, train your model, retrain your model, stop the training when you feel it's good, restart it if you want, and you can see everything happening with direct manipulation in real time, and everything can be controlled graphically. It can also be controlled through OSC, and the output of Autolium goes into an ADI feed, so you can feed it to another software, maybe Earzoom if you're a VJ, or touch designer if you're an interactive artist. What we mean by direct controls is literally you can hook up the parameters to controllers and navigate, in this case, an abstract painting model trained on your own data, and then save what you like, save the presets, makes loops, makes movement and animation. So we've been developing with this small data and model crafting sort of ethos. We've been working in collaboration with artists. We started working with those systems ourselves, and then we started collaboration. Here this is with Erika Lapala-Jansen, who is a media artist from Vancouver, and she was really interested in training a model on her own artwork, and she does static art, but with Autolium we were capable also to make some of the art move. We've also been working with, most artists have a very specific aesthetic. We always forget that. And those big data models, they train on a data distribution where most non-Hollywood Western aesthetic, which is the most of the data, most specific type of aesthetic would be what we call the long tail of the distribution. And those models have terrible issues capturing that. For example, my PhD student Arshia Soban is an Arabic calligrapher. And when we use DALL-E or Dream, any big model to generate Arabic calligraphy, you get something like that. It's not bad looking, it's just that these are not Arabic characters. And that's pretty insulting if you're an Arabic calligrapher. It turns out there's two reasons for that. There's not enough good Arabic calligraphy online for the model to learn. And second, when there is calligraphy online, these are paintings by white painters for white audience in Europe in the 19th century. And those painters are also faking the Arabic calligraphy, because why not? This is a bias described in the 70s by Edward Said in this book called Orientalism, which is the name of the bias. And so if you want to do Arabic calligraphy, it's contemporary calligraphy and it's moving, but if you want to do Arabic calligraphy, you have no choice but to go small data and model crafting. You will have to train your own model, and now we work with libraries in the Middle East to train some of these models that are more specific on this type of artwork. So we were showing a number of artwork made with that small data model crafting approach in Ars Electronica, some performances here at ISEA, interactive installations. And then when we play with our musical agents, we use Autolium to make audio reactive visuals as well in the background. And here I'll play a little excerpt before concluding. All right, and in this case, it's Autolium going through Touch Designer and controlled by Vijay Amagi, because we definitely can't get rid of artists. If you're interested in Autolium, we have workshops online. We give workshops in a number of art schools. We're happy to give more workshops if needed. So what I just said here is that, yes, you can use DALL-E and navigate through prompting, which is a terrible interface, a model trained on everyone else's data, or you can create and train on your data a model that you craft by training a model, saying, oh, that model is no good, I'm going to remove that data, add more data, do this, and train again, and eventually get something that is yours and that is satisfying, at least to you, because we believe there's a lot more authorship happening when you train your own model on your own data. Who is going to then challenge you legally that this is not your work? versus prompting with a single sentence a model that is definitely not yours. So we think that also is a way to go around the legal shenanigan we are into. Not that it will change the fact that this needs to be solved. So to finish, I just want to say that, yeah, against those fears, there is really this new wave of augmentation and automation. And fears, I gave a number of talks into film festivals in the last few years. There was a big strike of the actors, the writers. If you're a voice actor right now, life is not fun. Things are changing. Graphic designers lost 30% of their income. There's a real, and students are asking, what are we studying and why? There's a real moment of, at least people are thinking of transformation. I'm not sure the transformation is really happening. But the thing is that this is nothing new. This is sort of the proof that there is some semblance of disruption, because when we automated physical work, there were some serious riots and movements against it. Not that the Luddites are only rioters, there were a lot more than that, but the French silk workers did the same, and more recently when musicians were replaced in theaters and cinemas by gramophones, the American Association Federation of Musicians found that it was important enough to spend their money into some space-time into the journals and magazines of the time. At the same time, yes, the loom has been automated, and maybe that was also the beginning of fashion, because all of a sudden, spending all day long moving that loom, more detailed, where clothes could be designed. Likewise, we survived those other changes, and so as jobs is being displaced and disrupted, new jobs, 10 years ago, no one was a prompt engineer. Now you can make six-figure doing all that. So there is those transitions, and we just live at a moment where it's really hard for anyone, expert like me, or anyone really, to have visibility. Uncertainty is on the horizon, not just when it comes to AI, but certainly when it does come to AI. So to conclude, what I talked about here is the fact that we have those big models, and there's problems and lack of transparency with them. They have issues with data, with big data, with issues with copyright and plagiarism that we can alleviate with small data. They have bias, those big models, and we can address those bias with a small data approach. In fact, we have very little other choice at the moment. There's technological unemployment and displacement happening, and that's a problem. There's the issue of deepfake and synthetic media, which we really have to pay attention to, because when it comes to the news and our democracies, this one can have serious impact, as everyone understands now. But there's also the phenomenological dimension of user experience, of living surrounded by those AI systems constantly. We already start showing the impact of those AI systems on younger adults with cognitive download, the same way that we can't orient ourselves in the city because we have Google Maps. They can't think critically because they have ChatGPT and they can ask any question at any time. So we have issues to pay attention to, and that's the less positive set of issues. There's more, but I want to keep you in good spirits, so I'm going to stop here. So that's what I talked about. That's what I talked about today. And to conclude, technology and humans have co-evolved. We're humans because we invented tools to kill animals, and that allowed us to fill ourselves with rich proteins and develop our brain instead of developing our body like other species did. And so I still believe in this idea of anthropocentric instrumentalism. These are just tools. The only thing we need to remember, and these are tools that we should have a choice on what tool gets developed for what and whether we want to use them or not. And I'm not sure we're given a lot of that choice at the moment. And so it's true that the rise of co-creative interfaces and computer-assisted creativity with AI has deep already social political implication, but I think that if we do it right, we can harness the power of machines to expand and support our creativity instead of replacing artists. And for that, we would need to seize the means of production. And I'm a big proponent, and I hope you would be with me, for not just sovereign AI, but yes, for this idea that eventually we have roads and mailboxes. It would be nice if AI and the infrastructure coming with it would also be public good and would be, in our case, national. Just to finish, for example, when you work with the National Film Board of Canada and you want to colorize the 170,000 movies they have, you can't, because the only tool is in California. And by law, you can't use those movies on Californian server, yeah? So there's real issues of of not having make AI a public service first. So I'll finish with that. I'm big on what we call the AI commons, and I think we need more AI commons and less Californian company, unfortunately. So I'll thank all of my kids, no, they're not kids actually, they're all adults that have worked with me, students, colleagues, postdocs, etc. If you want to hear my French accent for way longer, I'm not sure you do, there's 2 courses on Cadence, which is a great MOOC, probably the only MOOCs that really teach creative skills at scale. If all the MOOCs online teach engineering and business, we are at a loss, and the front of knowledge is already not necessarily in favor of creative domains these days. So this is a great resort. If you want, you can also indeed tell your students there's a new human-centered AI macro certificate that is started at SFU, and for the first time we got the right to open those 4 courses to non-for-credit students. In other words, we're starting to merge continuing education with education. Those courses didn't exist when our students were students, and it's not true that a bachelor degree is going to serve our students for the next 40 years. And so we need to change the way the university is structured and the way we actually deliver knowledge to our students, which usually are actually way too busy to engage into a 4-year full-time enterprise nowadays. All right, so that's my little thing about education. And then we organize conferences for those who are interested in AI and music. We run this one. It was in Brussels this year. It'll be in Berlin next year. And then we bring it to Canada. And with that, I want to thank the funding bodies. I got NSERC, and the Canada Council for the Arts. And I want to thank you all for your attention tonight. I know it was a lot. I speak fast and with a strong accent. I apologize.